but highly effective in practice. They constituted the trigger that aroused a far-ranging tempest in all the corners of the world. The verses comprise the constituents of the new call and propagation of the new faith. A warning logically implies that there are malpractices with painful consequences to be sustained by the perpetrators, and since the present life is not necessarily the only room to bring people to account for their misdeeds or some of them, then the warning would necessarily imply calling people to account on another day, i.e. the day of resurrection, and this per se suggests the existence of a life other than this one we are living. All the verses of the Noble Core call people to testify explicitly to the oneness of all, to delegate all their affairs to all, the All High, and to subordinate the desires of the self and the desires of all servants to the attainment of his pleasures. The constituents of the call to Islam could, briefly speaking, go as follows: a testimony to the oneness of all, b. belief in the hereafter, c. sanctifying one's soul and elevating it high above evils and abominations that conduce to terrible consequences. Besides this, there is the dire need for virtues and perfect manners coupled with habituating oneself to righteous deeds. D. Committing one's all affairs to all, the All High. E. All the foregoing should run as a natural corollary to unwavering belief in Muhammad's message and abidance by his noble leadership and righteous guidance. The verses have been prefaced, in the voice of the Most High, by a heavenly call, mandating the Prophet, pbuh, to undertake this daunting responsibility, calling people unto all. The verses meant to extract him forcibly out of his sleep, divest him of his mantle and detach him from the warmth and quiet of life, and then drive him down a new course attended with countless hardships, and requiring a great deal of strife in the way of all. 47. Msa Niu. O you Muhammad, pbuh, enveloped in garments. Arise and warn. Al-Quran 74-1-2, suggesting that to live to oneself is quite easy, but it has been decided that you have to shoulder this heavy burden. Consequently, sleep, comfort, or warm bed are items decreed to be alien in your lexicon of life. O Muhammad, arise quickly for the strife and toil awaiting you. No time is there for sleep in such amenities. Grave responsibilities have been divinely determined to fall to your lot, and drive you into the turmoil of life to develop a new sort of precarious affinity with the conscience of people and the reality of life. The Prophet, pbuh, managed quite successfully to rise to his feet and measure up to the new task. He went ahead in a spirit of complete selflessness, relentlessly striving, and never abating in carrying the burden of the great trust, the burden of enlightening mankind, and the heavy weight of the new faith and strife for over 20 years, nothing distracting his attention from the awesome commission. May all reward him, for us and all humanity, the best ending. The following research at hand gives an account in miniature of his long strive and uninterrupted struggle he made after receiving the ministry of messengership. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29-168, 171,182, 48. Phases and stages of the call. Msa Niu. The Muhammadan call could be divided into two phases distinctively demarcated. 1. The Makkan phase, nearly 13 years. 2. The Madanese phase, fully 10 years. Each of the two phases included distinctive features easily discernible through accurate scrutiny into the circumstances that characterized each of them. The Makkan phase can be divided into three stages. 1. The stage of the secret call, 3 years. 2. The stage of the proclamation of the call in Makkah, from the beginning of the 4th year of prophethood to almost the end of the 10th year. 3. The stage of the call to Islam and propagating it beyond Makkah. It lasted from the end of 10th year of the prophethood until Muhammad's, pbuh, emigration to Madinah. The Madanese phase will be considered later in its due course. The first stage, strife in the way of the call, 3 years of secret call. It is well known that Makkah was the center for the Arabs, and housed the custodians of Al-Kaaba. Protection and guardianship of the idols and stone-graven images that received veneration on the part of all the Arabs lay in the hands of the Makkans, hence the difficulty of hitting the target of reform and rectitude in a place considered the den of idolatry. Working in such an atmosphere no doubt requires unshakable will and determination. That is why the call unto Islam assumed a clandestine form so that the Makkans should not be enraged by the unexpected surprise. The early converts. The Prophet, pbuh, naturally initiated his sacred mission right from home and then moved to the people closely associated with him. He called unto Islam whomsoever he thought would attest the truth which had come from his Lord. In fact, a host of people who nursed not the least seed of doubt as regards the Prophet, pbuh, immediately responded and quite readily embraced the true faith. They are known in the Islamic literature as the early converts. Khadijah, the Prophet's spouse, the mother of believers, was the first to enter the fold of Islam, followed by his freed slave Zayd bin Haritha, his cousin, Ali bin Abi Talib, who had been living with him since his early childhood, and next came his intimate friend Abu Bakr as Siddiq Abu Bakr, the truth verifier. All of those professed Islam on the very first day of the call. Rahmat lil Alamin 150th, Abu Bakr, and from the first day he embraced Islam, proved to be an energetic and most 49 Msa Niu zealous activist. He was wealthy, obliging, mild and upright. People used to frequent his house and draw nigh to him for his knowledge, amity, pleasant company and business. He invited whomever he had confidence into Islam, and through his personal efforts a good number of people converted to Islam, such as Uthman bin Affan al-Umawi, Az-Zubair bin Awam al-Asadi, Abdurrahman bin Awf, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, Az-Zuhri and Talha bin Ubaidullah at-Tamimi. Those 8 men constituted the forerunners and more specifically the vanguard of the new faith in Arabia. Among the early Muslim were Bilal bin Rabah the Abyssinian, Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah from Bani Harith bin Far, the most trustworthy of the Muslim nation, Abu Salama bin Abd al-Asad, al-Arqam bin Abi al-Arqam from the tribe of Mazum, Uthman bin Mazun and his 2 brothers Qudama and Abdullah, Ubaidah bin al-Harith bin al-Muttalib bin Abd Munaf, Sa'id bin Zayd al-Adawi and his wife Fatima, daughter of al-Khattab, the sister of Umar bin al-Khattab, Kabab bin al-Arat, Abdul bin Masud al-Hadali and many others. These were the Muslim predecessors. They belonged to various septs of Quraysh. Ibn Hisham, a biographer, counted them to be more than 40. Ibn Hisham 1 245-262, Ibn Ishaq said, "Then people entered the fold of Islam in hosts, men or women, and the new faith could no longer be kept secret." Ibn Hisham 1 262, the Prophet, pbuh, used to meet and teach the new converts the religion in privacy, because the call to Islam was still running on an individual and secret basis. Revelation accelerated and continued after the first verses of you wrapped in garments. The verses and pieces of chapters revealed at this time were short ones with wonderful strong pauses and quite fascinating rhythms in full harmony with that delicate whispering setting. The central topic running through them focused on sanctifying the soul and deterring the Muslims from falling prey to the deceptive glamour of life. The early verses used as well to give a highly accurate account of the hell and the garden paradise, leading the believers down a new course diametrically opposed to the ill practices rampant amongst their compatriots. As the prayer. Muqatil bin Sulayman said, prayer was established as an obligatory ritual at an early stage of the Islamic call, a 2 unit of prayer in the morning, and the same in the evening, and glorify the praises of your Lord in the Ashi, i.e. the time period after the mid-noon till sunset, and in the Ibkar, i.e. the time period from early morning or sunrise till before mid-noon. Al-Quran 40-55. Ibn Hayr said, definitely the Prophet, pbuh, used to pray before the night journey, but it still remains a matter of controversy whether or not the prayer was established as an obligatory ritual before imposing the rules of the usual 5 prayers a day. It is related that obligatory prayer was established twice a day, in the morning before sunrise and after sunset. It is reported through a chain of narrators that when the Prophet, pbuh, received the first revelation, Gabriel, the angel, proceeded and taught him how to observe wudu ablution. When the Prophet, pbuh, had finished, he took a handful of water and sprinkled it on his loins. Muqtasar Sirat Rasul. Ibn Hisham reported that when it was time for prayers, the Messenger of all, pbuh, and his companions went into a mountain valley to pray secretly. Abu Talib once saw the Messenger of all, pbuh, and Ali praying. He asked them what they were up to. When he got to know that it was obligatory prayer, he told them to stay constant in their practice. Ibn Hisham 1 247. The Qurayshites learn about the call. This stage of the call, even though conducted in a clandestine manner and on an individual basis, its news leaked out and assumed a public interest all over Makkah. In the beginning, the Meccan leaders did not care much about Muhammad, pbuh, and took no heed of his teachings. At first, they thought that Muhammad, pbuh, was merely a religious philosophist like Umayyah bin Abi as-Salt, Qus bin Sida, Amr bin Nufail and their ilk who used to philosophize on godship and religious obligations. But this attitude of indifference soon changed into real apprehension. The polytheists of Quraysh began to watch Muhammad's movements closely and anxiously for fear of spreading his call and producing a change in the prevalent mentality. Fiqh as-Sirah p.76. For 3 underground years of activism, a group of believers emerged stamped by a spirit of fraternity and cooperation with one definite objective in their mind, propagating and deeply establishing the call unto Islam. For full 3 years, Muhammad, pbuh, had been content to teach within a rather narrow circle. The time had, however, come to preach the faith of the Lord openly. The angel Gabriel had brought him down a further revelation of Allah's will to confront his people, invalidate their falsehood and crush down their idolatrous practices. 51. The second phase, open preaching, Msa. First revelation regarding the preaching, and warn your tribe O Muhammad, pbuh, of near kindred. Al-Quran 26-214. This was the first verse to be revealed in this concern. It is included in S. Shur, I greater than chapter 26 The Poets which relates the story of Moses, AWS, from his early days of prophethood going through his migration with the children of Israel, their escape from the Pharaoh and his folk, and the drowning Pharaoh and his hosts. This chapter in fact narrates the different stages that Moses, AWS, passed through in his struggle with Pharaoh and the mission of calling his people unto all. Moreover, it includes stories that speak about the terrible end in store for those who belied the messengers such as the people of Noah, Ad, Thamud, Abraham, Lut and Ulul Aika companions of the wood, a group of people who used to worship a tree called Aika. Chronologically, this chapter belongs to the Middle Makkan period, when the contact of the light of prophecy with the cultural milieu of pagan Makkah was testing the Makkans in their most arrogant mood. The message that this chapter communicates is in brief, the truth is insurmountable. When the spirit of prophecy came to Makkah, it was resisted by the votaries of evil. But truth, unlike falsehood, is bound to stay, whereas falsehood is surely perishable. Calling the closest kinspeople, in obedience to Allah's commands, Muhammad, pbuh, rallied his kinsmen of Bani Hashim with a group of Bani al-Muttalib bin Abd Munaf. The audience counted 45 men. Abu Lahab immediately took the initiative and addressed the Prophet, pbuh, these are your uncles and cousins, speak on to the point. But first of all you have got to know that your kinspeople are not in a position to withstand all the Arabs. Another point you have got to bear in mind is that your relatives are sufficient unto you. If you follow their tradition, it will be easier for them than to face the other clans of Quraysh supported by the other Arabs. Verily, I have never heard of anyone who has incurred more harm on his kinspeople than you. The messenger of Allah, pbuh, kept silent and said nothing in that meeting. He invited them to another meeting and managed to secure audience. He then stood up and delivered a short speech explaining quite cogently what was at stake. He said, I celebrate Allah's praise, I seek his help, I believe in him, I put my trust in him, I bear witness that there is no God to be worshipped but Allah, with no associate. A guide can never lie to his people. I swear by Allah, there is no God but he, that I have been sent as a messenger to you, in particular and to all the people, in general. I swear by Allah, you will die just as you sleep, you will be resurrected just as you wake up. You will be called to account for your deeds. It is then either hell forever or the garden paradise forever. 52. Msa. Abu Talib replied, we love to help you, accept your advice and believe in your words. These are your kinspeople whom you have collected and I am one of them, but I am the fastest to do what you like. Do what you have been ordered. I shall protect and defend you, but I can't quit the religion of Abdul Muttalib. Abu Lahab then said to Abu Talib, I swear by Allah that this is a bad thing. You must stop him before the others do. Abu Talib, however, answered, I swear by Allah to protect him as long as I am alive. Fiqh as-Sirah p.77, 78. On Mount as-Safa, after the messenger of Allah, pbuh, became sure of Abu Talib's commitment to his protection while he called the people unto Allah, he stood up on Mount as-Safa one day and called out loudly, O Sabaha. This is an Arabic expression used when one appeals for help or draws the attention of others to some dangers. Seps of Quraysh came to him. He called them to testify to the oneness of all, and believe in his messengership and the day of resurrection. Al-Bukhari reported part of this story, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, R. He said, when the following verses were revealed, and warn your tribe, O Muhammad, pbuh, of near kindred. Al-Quran 26-214. The messenger of all, pbuh, ascended Mount As-Safa and started to call, O Bani, Far, O Bani, Adi, 2 Seps of Quraysh. Many people gathered, and those who couldn't sent somebody to report to them. Abu Lahab was also present. The Prophet, pbuh, said, you see, if I were to tell you that there were some horsemen in the valley planning to raid you, will you believe me? They said, yes, we have never experienced any lie from you. He said, I am a warner to you before a severe torment. Abu Lahab promptly replied, perish you all the day. Have you summoned us for such a thing? The verses were immediately revealed on that occasion. Bukhari 2:700 seconds, Muslim 1:114, perish the two hands of Abi Lahab. Al-Quran 111-1. Muslim reported another part of this story on the authority of Abu Hurairah, R. He said, when the following verses were revealed, and warn your tribe, O Muhammad, pbuh, of near kindred. 26-214. The messenger of all, pbuh, called all the people of Quraysh, so they gathered, and he gave them a general warning. Then he made a particular reference to certain tribes, and said, O Quraysh, rescue yourselves from the fire. O people of Bani Ka'b, rescue yourselves from fire. O Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, pbuh, rescue yourself from the fire, for I have no power to protect you from all? In anything, except that I would sustain relationship with you. Muslim 1:114, Bukhari 1:385, 2:700 seconds. It was verily a loud suggestive call stating unequivocally to the closest people that belief in his message constituted the cornerstone of any future relation between him and them, and that the blood relation on which the whole Arabian life was based had ceased to exist in the light of that divine ultimatum. 53. Shouting the truth and the polytheists' reaction. Msa Neu. The Prophet's voice kept reverberating in Makkah until the following verse was revealed, therefore proclaim openly Allah's message, Islamic monotheism, that which you are commanded, and turn away from al-mushrik. Polytheists. Al-Quran 15-94. He then commenced discrediting the superstitious practices of idolatry, revealing its worthless reality and utter impotence, and giving concrete proofs that idolatry per se, or taking it as the media through which an idolater could come in contact with all, is manifest falsehood. The Makkans, on their part, burst into outrage and disapproval. Muhammad's pbuh words created a thunderbolt that turned the Makkan time-honored ideological life upside down. They could ill afford to hear someone attaching to polytheists and idolaters the description of straying people. They started to rally their resources to settle down the affair, quell the onward marching revolution, and deal a preemptive strike to its votaries before it devours and crushes down their consecrated traditions and long-standing heritage. The Makkans had the deep conviction that denying godship to anyone save all, and that belief in the divine message and the hereafter, are interpreted in terms of complete compliance and absolute commitment, and this, in turn, leaves no area at all for them to claim authority over themselves and over their wealth, let alone their subordinates. In short, their arrogated religiously based supremacy and high-handedness would no longer be in effect, their pleasures would be subordinated to the pleasures of all, and his messenger, and lastly they would have to abstain from incurring injustices on those whom they falsely deemed to be weak, and perpetrating dreadful sins in their everyday life. They had already been fully aware of these meanings, that is why their souls would not condescend to accept this disgraceful position, not out of motives based on dignity and honor, but rather because, nay, man denies resurrection and reckoning, so he desires to continue committing sins. Al-Quran 75-5. They had been aware of all these consequences, but they could afford to do nothing before an honest, truthful man who was the highest example of good manners and human values. They had never known such an example in the history of their folks or grandfathers. What would they do? They were baffled, and they had the right to be so. Following careful deliberations, they hit upon the only target available, i.e. to contact the messenger's uncle, Abu Talib, and request him to intervene and advise his nephew to stop his activities. In order to attach a serious and earnest stamp to their demand, they chose to touch the most sensitive area in Arabian life, viz., ancestral pride. They addressed Abu Talib in the following manner: O Abu Talib, your nephew curses our gods, finds faults with our way of life, mocks at our religion and degrades our forefathers. Either you must stop him, or you must let us get at him. For you are in the same opposition as we are in opposition to him, and we will rid you of him. Abu Talib tried to appease their wrath by giving them a polite reply. The Prophet, pbuh, however, continued on his way preaching Allah's religion and calling men, 54, Msa Neu, hitherto, heedless of all their desperate attempts and malicious intentions. Ibn Hisham 1-265, an advisory council to debar pilgrims from Muhammad's call. During those days, Quraysh had another serious concern. The proclamation of the call had only been a few months old when the season of pilgrimage was soon to come. Quraysh knew that the Arab delegates were coming within a short time. They agreed that it was necessary to contemplate a device that was bound to alienate the Arab pilgrims from the new faith preached by Muhammad, pbuh. They went to see al-Walid bin al-Mughira to deliberate on this issue. Al-Walid invited them to agree on a unanimous resolution that could enjoy the approbation of them all. However, they were at variance. Some suggested that they describe him as Kahan, i.e., soothsayer, but this suggestion was turned down on grounds that his words were not so rhymed. Others proposed Majnun, i.e., possessed by jinn. This was also rejected because no insinuations peculiar to that state of mind were detected, they claimed. Why not say he is a poet? Some said. Here again they could not reach a common consent, alleging that his words were totally outside the lexicon of poetry. Okay then, let us accuse him of practicing witchcraft, was a fourth suggestion. Here, also al-Walid showed some reluctance, saying that the Prophet, pbuh, was known to have never involved himself in the practice of blowing on the knots, and admitted that his speech was sweet-tasting root and branch. He, however, found that the most plausible charge to be leveled against Muhammad, pbuh, was witchcraft. The ungodly company adopted this opinion and agreed to propagate one uniform formula, to the effect that he was a magician so powerful and commanding in his art that he would successfully alienate son from father, man from his brother, wife from her husband, and man from his clan. Ibn Hisham 1-271. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29-188. It is noteworthy in this regard to say that all revealed 16 verses as regards al-Walid in the cunning method he contemplated to manipulate the people expected to arrive in Makkah for pilgrimage. All says, verily, he thought and plotted, so let him be cursed. How he plotted, and once more let him be cursed, how he plotted. Then he thought, then he frowned, and he looked in a bad-tempered way. Then he turned back and was proud. Then he said, this is nothing but magic from that of old. This is nothing but the word of a human being. Al-Quran 74-1825. The most wicked of them was the sworn enemy of Islam and Muhammad, pbuh, Abu Lahab, who would shadow the Prophet's steps, crying aloud, O men, do not listen to him, for he is a liar. He is an apostate. Nevertheless, Muhammad, pbuh, managed to create a stir in the whole area, and even to convince a few people to accept his call. At Tirmidhi, Masood Ahmad, 3 492, 4 341, attempts made to check the onward march of Islam. Having fully perceived that Muhammad, pbuh, could never be desisted from his call, Quraysh, in a desperate attempt to quell the tidal wave of the call, resorted to other cheap means, acting from base motives. 55. Msa Neu. 1. Scoffing, degrading, ridiculing, belying, and laughter, instigating cheap manners, all of which leveled at the new converts in general, and the person of Muhammad, pbuh, in particular, with the aim of dragging the spirit of despair into their morale, and slackening their ardent zealotry. They used to denounce the Prophet, pbuh, as a man possessed by a jinn, or an insane person, and they say, O you Muhammad, pbuh, to whom the dhikr, the core, has been sent down, verily, you are a mad man. Al-Quran 15-6, or a liar practicing witchcraft, and the Arab pagans wonder that a warner Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, has come to them from among themselves. And the disbelievers say, this Prophet Muhammad, pbuh, is a sorcerer, a liar. Al-Quran 38-4. Their eyes would also look at the good man as if they would eat him up, or trip him up, or disturb him from the position of stability or firmness. They used all sorts of terms of abuse, madman, or one possessed by an evil spirit, and so on, and verily, those who disbelieve would almost make you slip with their eyes, through hatreds when they hear the reminder the core. And they say, verily, he Muhammad, pbuh, is a madman. Al-Quran 68-51, amongst the early converts, there was a group who had unfortunately no strong clan at their back to support them. These innocent souls were ridiculed and jeered in season and out of season. Referring to such people, the highbrow Quraysh aristocrats used repeatedly to ask the Prophet, pbuh, with jest and scorn, all has favored from amongst us? Al-Quran 6:53, and all said, does not all know best those who are grateful? Al-Quran 6:53, the wicked used to laugh at the righteous in many ways. A. They would inwardly laugh at their faith, because they felt themselves so superior. B. In public places, when the righteous passed, they used to insult and wink at them. Circa in their own houses, they would run them down. D. Whenever and wherever they saw them, they reproached and called them fools who had lost their way. In the hereafter, all these tricks and falsehoods will be shown for what they are, and the tables will be reversed. All had said, 56. Msa Neu. Verily, during the worldly life those who committed crimes used to laugh at those who believed, and whenever they passed by them, used to wink one to another in mockery. And when they returned to their own people, they would return jesting, and when they saw them, they said, verily, these have indeed gone astray. But they disbelievers, sinners had not been sent as watchers over them the believers. Al-Quran 83-29 3-3, 2. Distorting Muhammad's teachings, evoking ambiguities, circulating false propaganda, forging groundless allegations concerning his doctrines, person, and character, and going to excess in such a manner in order to screen off any scope of sound contemplation from the public. With respect to the core, they used to allege that it was tales of the ancients, which he Muhammad, pbuh, has written down, and they are dictated to him morning and afternoon. Al-Quran 25-5, the iniquitous went on ceaselessly inculcating in people's ears that the core was not a true revelation. This the core is nothing but a lie that he Muhammad, pbuh, has invented, and others have helped him at it. Al-Quran 25-4, the wicked would also attribute to men of all just such motives and springs of action as they themselves would be guilty of in such circumstances. The pagans and those who were hostile to the revelation of all and Islam could not understand how such wonderful verses could flow from the tongue of the Prophet, pbuh, without having someone to teach, and claimed, it is only a human being who teaches him. Al-Quran 16-103, they also raised another baseless and superficial objection. Why does this messenger Muhammad, pbuh, eat food and walk about in the markets like ourselves? Al-Quran 25-7, they were sadly ignorant and painfully at fault, for they could not perceive that a teacher for mankind is one who shares their nature, mingles in their life, is acquainted with their doings, and sympathizes with their joys and sorrows. The noble core has vehemently refuted their charges and allegations and has explained that the utterances of the Prophet, pbuh, are the revelations of the Lord, and their nature and contents provide a bold challenge to those who attribute his prophetic expressions to some base origin, at times to the mental throes of a dreaming reformer, at others to the effusion of a frenzied poet or the incoherent driveling of an insane man. 3. Contrasting the core with the mythology of the ancients in order to distract people's interests from all S words. Once an Nader bin Harith addressed the Qurayshites in the following manner: O Quraysh, you have experienced an 57. Msa Neu, unprecedented phenomenon before which you have so far been desperately helpless. Muhammad, pbuh, grew up here among you and always proved to be highly obliging, the most truthful and trustworthy young man. However, later on when he reached manhood, he began to preach a new faith alien to your society, and opposed to your likings, so you began to denounce him at a time as a sorcerer, at another as a soothsayer, a poet, or even an insane man. I swear by all, he is not any one of those. He is not interested in blowing on knots as magicians are, nor do his words belong to the world of soothsaying. He is not a poet either, for his mentality is not that of a rambler, nor is he insane because he has never been witnessed to develop any sort of hallucinations or insinuations peculiar to madmen. O people of Quraysh, it is really a serious issue, and I recommend that you reconsider your attitude. It is narrated that a Nader, at a later stage, headed for Hira, where he got conversant with the traditions of the kings of Persia and the accounts of people like Rustam and Asfandiar, and then returned to Makkah. Here he would always shadow the messenger's steps in whatever audiences the latter held to preach the new faith and to caution people against all wrath. An narrator would directly follow the prophet, pbuh, and narrate to the same audience long tales about those people of Persia. He would then always append his talk with a question cunningly inquiring if he did not outdo Muhammad, pbuh, Ibn Hisham 1,299,300,358, Tafhim al-Quran 4/8, 9. Ibn Abbas, R. related that a narrator used to purchase songstresses who would, through their bodily charms and songs, entice away from Islam anyone developing the least attachment to the Prophet, pbuh, in this regard. All says, and of mankind is he who purchases idle talks, i.e. music, singing, etc. to mislead men from the path of all. Al-Quran 31-6, Tafhim al-Quran 4/9. 4. In a fresh attempt to dissuade Muhammad, pbuh, from his principled stand, Quraysh invited him to compromise on his teachings and come to terms with their pre-Islamic practices in such a way that he quits some of his religion and the polytheists do the same. The All-High says, 5. They wish that you should compromise in religion out of courtesy with them, so they too would compromise with you. Al-Quran 68-9. On the authority of Ibn Jarir and At-Tabarani, the idolaters offered that Muhammad, pbuh, worship their gods for a year, and they worship his Lord for a year. In another version, they said, if you accept our gods, we would worship yours. Ibn Ishaq related that Al-Aswad bin al-Muttalib, Al-Walid bin al-Mughira, Umayyah bin Khalif and Al-As bin Wa'il as-Sami, a constellation of influential polytheists, intercepted the Prophet, pbuh, while he was circumambulating in the holy sanctuary, and offered him to worship that they worshipped, and they worshipped that he worshipped, so that, according to them, both parties would reach a common denominator. They added, should the Lord you worship prove to be better than ours, then it will be so much better for us, but if our gods prove to be better than yours, then you would have benefit from it. The Exalted was decisive on the spot and revealed the following chapter, 58, Msa Neu. Say, O Al-Kir, disbelievers in all, in his oneness, in his angels, in his books, in his messengers, in the day of resurrection, in Al-Qadr, etc. I worship not that which you worship, nor will you worship that which I worship, and I shall not worship that which you are worshipping, nor will you worship that which I worship. To you be your religion, and to me my religion. Islamic monotheism. Al-Quran 109, Ibn Hisham 1/362, persecutions. At the beginning of the 4th year of the call, and for a period of some months, the polytheists confined their harassment tactics to the above-mentioned ones. But on realizing the futility of these procedures, they decided to organize a full-scale opposition campaign. They called for a general meeting and elected a committee of 25 men of Quraysh notables with Abu Lahab, the Prophet's uncle, as a chairman. Following some lengthy deliberations, they reached a decisive decision to take measures deemed to stop the tidal wave of Islam through different channels. They were determined to spare no effort in combating the new faith. They decided to malign the messenger of all, pbuh, and put the new converts to different sorts of torture using all available resources. It was easy to put the resolutions relating to the new converts who were deemed weak into effect. As for the Prophet, pbuh, it was not easy to malign him because he had such gravity, magnanimity and matchless perfection of character that deterred even his enemies from committing any act of folly against him. He had, as well, Abu Talib, his uncle, who came from a noble descent and had an awe-inspiring clan to support him. This situation was a source of great worry to the infidels, but they felt that they could no longer exercise patience or show any tolerance before a formidable power marching steadily to annul their religious office and temporal authority. Abu Lahab himself took the initiative in the new series of persecutions, and started to mete out countless aspects of harmful deeds, hatred and spite against Muhammad, pbuh. Starting with flinging stones at him, forcing his 2 sons to divorce their wives Ruqayya and Kulthum, the Prophet's daughters, Fi Zalal al-Quran, 3280 seconds, Tafhim al-Quran 6520 seconds, gloating over him on his second son's death, calling him the man cut off with offspring, and then shadowing his step during the pilgrimage and forum seasons to belie him and entice the Bedouin against him and his call, at Termidi. His wife, Jamil bint Harb, the sister of Abu Sufyan, had also her share in this ruthless campaign. She proved that she was not less than her husband in the enmity and hatred she harbored for the Prophet, pbuh. She used to tie bundles of thorns with ropes of twisted palm leaf fiber and strew them about in the paths which the Prophet, pbuh, was expected to take, in order to cause him bodily injury. She was a real shrew, bad-tempered with abusive language, highly skilled in the art of hatching intrigues, and in kindling the fire of discord and sedition. She was deservedly stained as the carrier of firewood in the noble corps. On receiving this news, she directly proceeded to the mosque with a handful of pebbles to hurl at the Prophet, pbuh. The Great, took away her sight and she saw only Abu Bakr, who was sitting immediately next to the Prophet, pbuh. She then addressed Abu Bakr most audaciously, threatening to break his companion's mouth with her handful of pebbles, and recited a line of verse pregnant with impudent defiance. We have disobeyed the dispraised one, rejected his call, and alienated ourselves from his religion. When she had left, Abu Bakr turned to the Prophet, 59, Msa Niu, pbuh, and inquired about the matter. The Prophet, pbuh, assured him that she did not see him because all had taken away her sight. Ibn Hisham 1-335, Abu Lahab and his household used to inflict those shameful examples of torture and harassment in spite of the blood relation that tied them, for he was the Prophet's uncle and both lived in two contiguous houses. Actually, few of the Prophet's neighbors abstained from maligning him. They even threw the entrails of a goat on his back while he was performing his prayers. He always used to complain about that unbecoming neighborliness, but to no avail, for they were deeply indulged in error. Al-Bukhari, on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud, narrated that once when the Prophet, pbuh, was prostrating himself while praying in Al-Kaaba, Abu Jahl asked his companions to bring the dirty fetus of a she-camel and place it on his back. Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt was the unfortunate man who hastened to do this ignoble act. A peal of laughter arose amongst the infidels. In the meanwhile, Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, pbuh, happened to pass that way. She removed the filth from her father's back. The Prophet, pbuh, invoked the wrath of all upon them, especially upon Abu Jahl, Utbah bin Rabi'ah, Shaybah bin Rabi'ah, Al-Walid bin Utbah, Umayyah bin Khalaf, and Uqba bin Mu'ayt. It is recorded that all of them were killed in the Battle of Badr. Bukhari 137. Scandal-mongering and backbiting were also amongst the means of oppression that the chiefs of Makkah, in general, and Umayyah bin Khalaf, in particular, resorted to in their overall process of evil-doing. In this regard, Allah says, "Woe to every slanderer and backbiter." Al-Quran 104-1. Uqba bin al-Mu'ayt once attended an audience of the Prophet, pbuh, and listened to him preaching Islam. A close friend of his, Ubay bin Khalaf, heard of this. He could not tolerate any act of this sort, so he reproached Uqba and ordered him to spit in the Prophet's holy face, and he shamelessly did it. Ubay did not spare any thinkable way to malign the Prophet, pbuh. He even ground old decomposed bones and blew the powder on him. Al-Aqnaz bin Shuraiq ath-Thaqafi used to detract from the character of the Prophet, pbuh, in season and out of season. The noble corps, in direct reference to this man's ignominious deeds, attached to him 9 abominable traits, and obey not everyone who swears much, and is considered worthless, a slanderer, going about with calumnies, hinderer of the good, transgressor, sinful, cruel, after all that base born of illegitimate birth. Al-Quran 68, 10-13, Ibn Hisham 1-356. Abu Jahl's arrogance and haughtiness blocked all avenues that could produce the least light of belief in his heart. So he, the disbeliever, neither believed in this corps, in the message of Muhammad, pbuh, nor prayed. Al-Quran 75-31. He, moreover, wanted to debar the Prophet, pbuh, from the noble sanctuary. It happened once that the Prophet, pbuh, was praying within the precinct of the sacred house, when Abu Jahl proceeded threateningly and uttering abusive language. The 60 Msa Niu Prophet, pbuh, chided him severely, to which Abu Jahl answered back defiantly, claiming that he was the mightiest in Makkah. All then revealed, then let him call upon his council of helpers. Al-Quran 96-17. In another version of the same incident, the Prophet, pbuh, took Abu Jahl by his neck, rocked him severely saying, "Woe to you, O man disbeliever! And then again woe to you! Again, woe to you, O man disbeliever! And then again woe to you!" Al-Quran 75-34, 35. Notwithstanding this reproach, Abu Jahl would never wake up to himself, nor did he realize his foolish practices. On the contrary, he was determined to go to extremes, and swore he would dust the messenger's face and tread on his neck. No sooner had he proceeded to fulfill his wicked intention than he was seen turning back, shielding himself with his hands as if something horrible in his pursuit. His companions asked him what the matter was. He said, "I perceived a ditch of burning fire and some wings flying." Later on, the messenger commented saying, if he had proceeded further, the angels would have plucked off his limbs one after another. Fi Zalal al-Quran 29:312. Muslim. Such was the disgraceful treatment meted out to the Prophet, pbuh, the great man, respected as he was by his compatriots, with an influential man, his uncle Abu Talib, at his back to support him. If the matters were so with the Prophet, pbuh, what about those people deemed weak with no clan to support them? Let us consider their situation in some detail. Whenever Abu Jahl heard of the conversion of a man of high birth with powerful friends, he would degrade his prudence and intellect, undermine his judgment, and threaten him with dire consequences if he was a merchant. If the new convert was socially weak, he would beat him ruthlessly and put him to unspeakable tortures. Ibn Hisham 1/320, the uncle of Uthman bin Affan, used to wrap Uthman in a mat of palm leaves, and set fire under him. When Musab bin Umair heard of her son's conversion, she put him to starvation and then expelled him from her house. He used to enjoy full, luxurious, easy life, but in the aftermath of the tortures he sustained, his skin got wizened, and he assumed a horrible physical appearance. Rahmat ul-Lil Alamin. 157th. Tawqi al-Athar p.60. Bilal, the slave of Umayyah bin Khalaf, was severely beaten by his master when the latter came to know of his conversion to Islam. Sometimes a rope was put around his neck and street boys were made to drag him through the streets and even across the hillocks of Makkah. At times he was subjected to prolonged deprivation of food and drink. At others he was bound up, made to lie down on the burning sand and under the crushing burden of heavy stones. Similar other measures were resorted to in order to force him to recant. All this proved in vain. He persisted in his belief in the oneness of all. On one such occasion, Abu Bakr was passing by. Moved by pity, he purchased and emancipated him from slavery. Ibn Hisham 1/317-318, Rahmat ul-Lil Alamin 157th. Another victim of the high-handedness of Quraysh was Ammar bin Yasir, a freed slave of Bani Mazoum. He, along with his mother and father, embraced Islam in its early 61 Msa New phase. They were repeatedly made to lie on the burning sand and were beaten severely. Ammar was at times tossed up on embers. The Prophet, pbuh, was greatly moved by the atrocities which were being perpetrated upon Ammar and his family. He always comforted them and raised his hand in prayer and said, "Be patient, you will verily find your abode in the paradise." Yasir, the father, died because of repeated tortures. Sumayya, Ammar's mother, was bayoneted to death by Abu Jahl himself, and thus merited the title of the first woman martyr in Islam. Ammar himself was subjected to various modes of torture and was always threatened to sustain severe suffering unless he abused Muhammad, pbuh, and recanted to Al-Lat and Uzza. In a weak moment, he uttered a word construed as recantation, though his heart never wavered, and he came back once to the Prophet, pbuh, who consoled him for his pain and confirmed his faith. Immediately afterwards the following verse was revealed: "Whoever disbelieved in all, after his belief, except him who is forced thereto and whose heart is at rest with faith." Al-Quran 16-106. Abu Faki, Afla, a freed slave of Bani Abd ad-Dar, was the third of those helpless victims. The oppressors used to fasten his feet with a rope and drag him in the streets of Makkah. Ajaz at Tanzil p.53. Khabab bin al-Arat was also an easy victim to similar outrages on every possible occasion. He experienced exemplary torture and maltreatment. The Meccan polytheists used to pull his hair and twist his neck, and made him lie on burning coal, with a big rock on his chest to prevent him from escaping. Some Muslims of rank and position were wrapped in the raw skins of camels and thrown away, and others were put in armors and cast on burning sand in the scorching sun of Arabia. Talki. Foam al-Athar p.60. Rahmat ul-Lil-Alamin 157th, even the women converts were not spared, and the list is too long to include all of them. Zanira, and Nadia and her daughter, Ubay and many others had their full share of persecution at the hand of the oppressors. Umar bin al-Khattab, included, of course before his conversion to Islam. Ibn Hisham 1319th, Abu Bakr, a wealthy believer, purchased and freed some of those she slaves, just as he did with regard to Bilal and Amir bin Fuhaira, the house of al-Arqam. In the light of these inhuman persecutions, the Prophet, pbuh, deemed it wise to advise his followers to conceal their conversion, in both word and deed. He took the decision to meet them secretly lest Quraysh should get to know of his designs, and so take measures that might foil his goals. He also had in mind to avoid any sort of open confrontation with the polytheists because such a thing at this early stage would not be in the interest of the newly born call, still vulnerable and not fully fledged. Once, in the 4th year of prophethood, the Muslims were on their way to the hillocks of Makkah to hold a clandestine meeting with the Prophet, pbuh, when a group of polytheists did observe their suspicious movement and began to abuse and fight them. Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas beat a polytheist and shed his blood and thus recorded the first instance of bloodshed in the history of Islam. Ibn Hisham 1263, 62. Msa Niu. The Prophet, pbuh, on the other hand, used to proclaim the Islamic faith and preach it openly with deep devotion and studious pursuit, but for the general welfare of the new converts and in consideration of the strategic interest of Islam, he took Dar al-Arqam, in as-Safa mountain, in the 5th year of his mission, as a temporary center to meet his followers secretly and instruct them in the core and in the Islamic wisdom. The first migration to Abyssinia, Ethiopia. The series of persecutions started late in the 4th year of prophethood, slowly at first, but steadily accelerated and worsened day by day and month by month until the situation got so extremely grave and no longer tolerable in the middle of the 5th year, that the Muslims began to seriously think of feasible ways liable to avert the painful tortures meted out to them. It was at that gloomy and desperate time that, al-Kahf chapter 18, the cave was revealed comprising definite answers to the questions with which the polytheists of Makkah constantly pestered the Prophet, pbuh. It comprises 3 stories that include highly suggestive parables for the true believers to assimilate. The story of the companions of the cave implies implicit guidance for the believers to evacuate the hot spots of disbelief and aggression, pregnant with the peril of enticement away from the true religion. The young men said to one another, "And when you withdraw from them, and that which they worship, accept all. Then seek refuge in the cave. Your Lord will open a way for you from his mercy and will make easy for you your affair, i.e. will give you what you will need of provision, dwelling, etc." Al-Quran 18:16. Next, there is the story of Al-Khidr, the teacher of Arabia, and Moses, AWS, in a clear and delicate reference to the vicissitudes of life. Future circumstances of life are not necessarily the products of the prevalent conditions, they might be categorically the opposite. In other words, the war waged against the Muslims would in the future assume a different turn, and the tyrannous oppressors would one day come to suffer and be subjected to the same tortures to which the Muslims were then put. Furthermore, there is the story of Dhul-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, the powerful ruler of West and East. This story says explicitly that all takes his righteous servants to inherit the earth and whatever in it. It also speaks that all raises a righteous man every now and then to protect the weak against the strong. Az-Zumar chapter 39. The crowds was then revealed pointing directly to migration and stating that the earth is spacious enough and the believers must not consider themselves constrained by the forces of tyranny and evil. Good is the reward for those who do good in this world, and all earth is spacious, so if you cannot worship all at a place, then go to another. Only those who are patient shall receive their rewards in full without reckoning. Al-Quran 39-10. The Prophet, pbuh, had already known that Ashurbanipal, king of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, was a fair ruler who would not wrong any of his subordinates, so he permitted some of his followers to seek asylum there in Abyssinia, Ethiopia. 63. Msa Niu. In Rajab of the 5th year of prophethood, a group of 12 men and 4 women left for Abyssinia, Ethiopia. Among the emigrants were Uthman bin Affan and his wife, Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet, pbuh. With respect to these two emigrants, the prophet, pbuh, said, "They are the first people to migrate in the cause of all?" After Abraham and Lot, AWS, they sneaked out of Makkah under the heavy curtain of a dark night and headed for the sea, where two boats happened to be sailing for Abyssinia, Ethiopia, their destination. News of their intended departure reached the ears of Quraysh, so some men were dispatched in their pursuit, but the believers had already left Shu'aib port towards their secure haven, where they were received warmly and accorded due hospitality. In Ramadan of the same year, the prophet, pbuh, went into the holy sanctuary, where there was a large host of Quraysh polytheists, including some notables and celebrities. Suddenly he began reciting and Najm chapter 41, the star. The awe-inspiring words of all descended unawares upon them, and they immediately got stunned by them. It was the first time for them to be shocked by the truthful revelation. It had formerly been the favorite trick of those people who wished to dishonor revelation, not only not to listen to it themselves but also to talk loudly and insolently when it was being read, so that even the true listeners may not be able to hear. They used to think that they were drowning the voice of all. In fact, they were piling up misery for themselves, for all's voice can never be silenced, and those who disbelieve say, "Listen not to this core, and make noise in the midst of its recitation, that you may overcome." Al-Quran 41-26. When the unspeakably fascinating words of all came into direct contact with their hearts, they were entranced and got oblivious of the materialistic world around them, and were caught in a state of full attentiveness to the divine words to such an extent that when the prophet, pbuh, reached the stormy heart-beating ending, "So fall you down in prostration to all, and worship him alone." Al-Quran 53-62. The idolaters, unconsciously and with full compliance, prostrated themselves in absolute God-fearing and stainless devotion. It was in fact the wonderful moment of the truth that cleaved through the obdurate souls of the haughty and the attitude of the scoffers. They stood aghast when they perceived that all's words had conquered their hearts and done the same thing that they had been trying hard to annihilate and exterminate. Their co-polytheists who had not been present on the scene reproached and blamed them severely. Consequently, they began to fabricate lies and calumniate the prophet, pbuh, alleging that he had attached to their idols great veneration and ascribed to them the power of desirable intercession. All of these were desperate attempts made to establish an excusable justification for their prostrating themselves with the prophet, pbuh, on that day. Of course, this foolish and iniquitous slanderous behavior was in line with their life-consecrated practice of telling lies and plot-hatching. 64. Msa Neu. News of this incident was misreported to the Muslim emigrants in Abyssinia, Ethiopia. They were informed that the whole of Quraysh had embraced Islam, so they made their way back home. They arrived in Makkah in Shawwal of the same year. When they were only an hour's travel from Makkah, the reality of the situation was discovered. Some of them returned to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, others sneaked secretly into the city or went in publicly but under the tutelage of a local notable. However, due to the news that transpired to the Makkans about the good hospitality and warm welcome that the Muslims were accorded in Abyssinia, Ethiopia, the polytheists got terribly indignant and started to mete out severer and more horrible maltreatment and tortures to the Muslims. Thereupon the messenger of all, pbuh, deemed it imperative to permit the helpless creatures to seek asylum in Abyssinia, Ethiopia for the second time. Migration this time was not as easy as it was the previous time, for Quraysh was on the alert to the least suspicious moves of the Muslims. In due course, however, the Muslims managed their affairs too fast for the Qurayshites to thwart their attempt of escape. The group of emigrants this time comprised 83 men and 19 or, in some versions, 18 women. Whether or not Ammar was included is still a matter of doubt. Tafhim al-Quran, 5/188, Zad al-Ma'ad 1/24, Ibn Hisham 1/364, Ramad ul-Lil-Alamin 1/61, Quraysh's machination against the emigrants. Quraysh could not tolerate the prospect of a secure haven available for the Muslims in Abyssinia, Ethiopia, so they dispatched 2 staunch envoys to demand their extradition. They were Amr bin al-As and Abdullah bin Abi Rabia. Before embracing Islam, they had taken with them valuable gifts to the king and his clergy, and had been able to win some of the courtiers over to their side. The pagan envoys claimed that the Muslim refugees should be expelled from Abyssinia, Ethiopia and made over to them, on the ground that they had abandoned the religion of their forefathers, and their leader was preaching a religion different from theirs and from that of the king. The king summoned the Muslims to the court and asked them to explain the teachings of their religion. The Muslim emigrants had decided to tell the whole truth, whatever the consequences were. Ja'far bin Abi Talib stood up and addressed the king in the following words: "O king, we were plunged in the depth of ignorance and barbarism, we adored idols, we lived in unchastity, we ate the dead bodies, and we spoke abominations, we disregarded every feeling of humanity, and the duties of hospitality and neighborhood were neglected. We knew no law but that of the strong, when all raised among us a man, of whose birth, truthfulness, honesty, and purity we were aware, and he called to the oneness of all, and taught us not to associate anything with him. He forbade us the worship of idols, and he enjoined us to speak the truth, to be faithful to our trusts, to be merciful and to regard the rights of the neighbors and kith and kin. He forbade us to speak evil of women, or to eat the substance of orphans. He ordered us to fly from the vices, and to abstain from evil, to offer prayers, to render alms, and to observe fast. We have believed in him, we have accepted his teachings and his injunctions to worship all, and not to associate anything with him, and we have allowed what he has allowed, and prohibited what he has prohibited. For this reason, our people have risen against us, have persecuted us in order to make us forsake the worship of all, and return to he worship of idols and other abominations. They have tortured and injured us, until, finding no safety among them, we have come to your country, and hope you will protect us from oppression." 65. Msa Neu. The king was very much impressed by these words and asked the Muslims to recite some of Allah's revelation. Ja'far recited the opening verses of Maryam. Chapter 19. Mary, wherein is told the story of the birth of both John and Jesus Christ, down to the account of Mary having been fed with the food miraculously. Thereupon the king, along with the bishops of his realm, was moved to tears that rolled down his cheeks and even wet his beard. Here, the Negus exclaimed, "It seems as if these words and those which were revealed to Jesus are the rays of the light which have radiated from the same source." Turning to the crest-fallen envoys of Quraysh, he said, "I am afraid, I cannot give you back these refugees. They are free to live and worship in my realm as they please." On the morrow, the two envoys again went to the king and said that Muhammad, pbuh, and his followers blasphemed Jesus Christ. Again the Muslims were summoned and asked what they thought of Jesus. Ja'far again stood up and replied, "We speak about Jesus as we have been taught by our prophet, pbuh, that is, he is the servant of all, his messenger, his spirit and his word breathed into Virgin Mary." The king at once remarked, "Even so do we believe. Blessed be you, and blessed be your master." Then turning to the frowning envoys and to his bishops, who got angry, he said, "You may fret and fume as you like, but Jesus is nothing more than what Ja'far has said about him." He then assured the Muslims of full protection. He returned to the envoys of Quraysh the gifts they had brought with them and sent them away. The Muslims lived in Abyssinia, Ethiopia unmolested for a number of years till they returned to Medina. Ibn Hisham 1-334-338. In this way Quraysh's malicious intentions recoiled on them and their machination met with utter failure. They came to fully realize that the grudge they nursed against Muslims would not operate but within their realm of Makkah. They consequently began to entertain a horrible idea of silencing the advocate of the new call once and for all, through various channels of brutality, or else killing him. An obstinate difficulty, however, used to curtail any move in this direction embodied by the Prophet's uncle Abu Talib and the powerful social standing he used to enjoy as well as the full protection and support he used to lend to his nephew. The pagans of Makkah therefore decided to approach Abu Talib for the second time and insisted that he put a stop to his nephew's activities, which if allowed unchecked, they said, would involve him into severe hostility. Abu Talib was deeply distressed at this open threat and the breach with his people and their enmity, but he could not afford to desert the messenger too. He sent for his nephew and told him what the people had said, "Spare me and yourself and put not burden on me that I can't bear." Upon this, the Prophet, pbuh, thought that his uncle would let him down and would no longer support him, so he replied, "O my uncle, by all, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left on condition that I abandon this course until all has made me victorious, or I perish therein, I would not abandon it." The Prophet, pbuh, got up, and as he turned away, his uncle called him and said, "Come back, my nephew," and when he came back, he said, "Go and preach what you please, for by all I will never forsake you." He then recited 2 lines of verse pregnant with meanings of full support to the prophet, pbuh, and absolute gratification by the course that his nephew had chalked out in Arabia. Ibn Hisham 1 66. Once more Quraysh approaches Abu Talib, Msa Niu. Quraysh, seeing that the messenger of all, pbuh, was still intent on his call, realized that Abu Talib would never forsake his nephew even if this incurred their enmity. Some of them then went to see him once more, taking with them a youth, called Amara bin al-Walid bin al-Mughira, and said, "O Abu Talib, we have brought you a smart boy still in the bloom of his youth, to make use of his mind and strength and take him as your son in exchange for your nephew, who has run counter to your religion, brought about social discord, found fault with your way of life, so that we kill him and rid you of his endless troubles, just man for man." Abu Talib's reply was, "It is really an unfair bargain. You give me your son to bring him up and I give you my son to kill him. By all, it is something incredible." Al-Mutim bin Adi, a member of the delegation, interrupted, saying that Quraysh had been fair in that bargain because they meant only to rid you of that source of hateful trouble, but as I see you are determined to refuse their favors. Abu Talib, of course, turned down all their offers and challenged them to do whatever they pleased. Ibn Hisham 1 Historical resources do not give the exact date of these 2 meetings with Abu Talib. They, however, seem more likely to have taken place in the 6th year of prophethood, with a brief lapse of time in between. The tyrant's decision to kill the prophet, pbuh, now that all the schemes and conspiracies of Quraysh had failed, they resorted to their old practices of persecution and inflicting tortures on the Muslims in a more serious and brutal manner than ever before. They also began to nurse the idea of killing the prophet, pbuh. In fact, contrary to their expectations, this new method and this very idea served indirectly to consolidate the call to Islam and support it. With the conversion of 2 staunch and mighty heroes of Makkah, i.e. Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib and Umar bin al-Khattab, Utaybah bin Abi Lahab once approached the prophet, pbuh, and most defiantly and brazenly shouted at him, "I disbelieve in by the star when it goes down." 53-1, and in then he Gabriel approached and came closer. 53-8. In other words, "I do not believe in any of the core." He then started to deal high-handedly with Muhammad, pbuh, and laid violent hand on him, tore his shirt and spat into his face, but his saliva missed the holy face of the prophet, pbuh. Thereupon, the prophet, pbuh, invoked Allah's wrath on Utaybah and supplicated, "O Allah, set one of your dogs on him." Allah responded positively to Muhammad's supplication, and it happened in the following manner. Once, Utaybah with some of his compatriots from Quraysh set out for Syria and took accommodation in Az-Zarqa. There a lion approached the group, to the great fear of Utbah, who at once recalled Muhammad's words in supplication, and said, "Woe to my brother! This lion will surely devour me just as Muhammad, pbuh, supplicated. He has really killed me in Syria while he is in Makkah." The lion did really rush like lightning, snatched Utbah from amongst his people and crushed his head. Tafhim ul-Quran 6:520, quoted from Al-Istiyab, Al-Isabah, Dalil in Nubuwah, etc., 67. Msa Niu.